I had a I had a friend write to me just earlier today who leads a meditation group, and he was just asking me about maybe shortening times in meditation, to make it more accessible for beginners, for when new people come to meditation, and how we handle that. That's a question that comes up sometimes in sitting groups, and how long to sit, or how short, how much to encourage new people to make it accessible, and then how much to not. For myself, I feel like the having the 30 minutes at least of sitting, that's the most important teaching that we can receive. The Dharma talks and the discussion is always welcome and hopefully useful, but the practice of sitting, just the practice of still sitting, is really the essential practice. I certainly appreciate the time to just sit. I was reflecting on, I brought up earlier just around traveling, and traveling had me thinking about dukkha, dissatisfactoriness. Right, we've taken the trip and everything that ensues, and watching the mind, and how I respond, how I react and respond to conditions. The Buddha, of course, was a great adept at being able to look at the reality of the human condition, look into the reality of the human condition, and unpack it, what causes dukkha, dissatisfactoriness, or even suffering, and what can be done to lessen that, to relieve suffering. And it's said somewhere, I can't remember where the quote is from, but all spirituality ultimately is about the relief of suffering that all things experience. Everything that is born into a conditional existence, everything that appears in form, is subject to the fact of impermanence, and therefore dukkha. The Buddha talked about it on a few different levels. I'm not very conversant with the Pali of the Sanskrit for these terms, but there is the dukkha. I know the first one is dukkha. I like that because it's like double dukkha. Have you ever had a double dukkha day? I'm sure I've had a few tripled dukkha squared days, right? But it's like dukkha is pain, right? It's just the appearance of pain or suffering that is just direct, and there's the fact of that. And then there's the second kind of dukkha, or dissatisfactoriness, that comes from something changing and producing a response of dukkha. Like we have the loss of something or someone, a job, a relationship. It could be many different things. There is the loss that comes around through change. And then he talks about a third level of dukkha, which is really the whole thing of seeing that dukkha, or dissatisfactoriness, is inescapable in this life, in this realm. That it is just the fact of being human, perhaps being other beings too, but being a human being is the only being that we're involved in. So that's the one that we study. So we live with this dukkha, or dissatisfactoriness. In the Zen tradition, the approach to dukkha, or suffering, is very much like all things Zen, is typically just a very direct, ultimately beyond method approach. Right. So, in just doing a little research, I was reading earlier around early Buddhist practice and practice of dukkha, and then a question comes up around: is it possible to completely avoid or escape dukkha? You know, to and the answer, and this answer in this text said yes, it is. And I was quite, I was quite surprised by that. I'm like, oh really? Okay. You know, quite surprised in the sense of the way to end it is to follow the and practice the Noble Eightfold Path to its ultimate conclusion. Will completely relieve suffering. Of course, this is, this is the great path of Buddhism. To look into how what causes suffering to arise, and then through different practices to be able to prevent that occurring in the future, or to stop to not create it now. Now, in Buddhist, in stricter Buddhist practices in different lineages, that involves a fair amount of abstaining from things. Right? So you don't do certain things because certain things ultimately will cause negative results. And that's true whether we've heard of Buddhism or not. Like in our life, certainly, right? We see into a certain amount of how cause and effect functions. The whole totality of cause and effect that occurs over centuries and millennia, we can't hold that in our minds. But we can see clearly simple cause and effect of, perhaps, a silly or a simple example, you eat too much and then you feel very uncomfortable because you ate too much, is a simple cause and effect response. That we can then decide, okay, now I'm not going to do that. Or you drink too much, or it could be, any of these things that we overindulge in, and it causes an effect. So if we take a stricter Buddhist approach perhaps, then we don't, we avoid going into that territory, right? This could be applied to many different things. If to avoid being angry, for instance, to avoid, the precepts talk about avoid discussing, one of the precepts, avoid discussing other people's errors and faults. That's a difficult one for me. I think maybe it's a difficult one for you. It's a difficult one for most people. If you take that precept very literally and just abstain from discussing another person's errors and faults, then you negate the suffering produced by doing so. But to do so, there is a restriction on our behavior as a human being. Because human beings love to gossip with one another and discuss errors and faults. Right? So to live a stricter Buddhist lifestyle involves some restriction in our sort of often a natural activities, but natural activities that may cause dukkha or add to the suffering of the human condition. I'm bringing that up because this is where Zen and Buddhism are not, divergent, but have a different flavor. So I'm going to bring in now a koan from the Zen tradition, and you may have heard me talk on this one before. I brought it up, probably not for a long time, but I sometimes reference it. And it's from the Blue Cliff record, and it's case 43. Case 43. No cold or heat. A monk asked Tozan. So this is Tozan, the founder of the Soto Zen tradition, of which Yokoji is a lineage temple. So this is very much coming from the pretty much the founder in China of this Zen tradition, of which I'm a member. A monk asked Tozan, when cold and heat come, how does one avoid them? So you could say when cold and heat can cause dukkha, how does one escape the dukkha of a dissatisfactoriness from being too hot and too cold? It's another way to phrase that question. When cold and heat come, how does one avoid them? Tozan said, Why not go to where there is no cold or heat? Why not go to where there is no cold or heat? The monk said, how is it where there is no cold or heat? Tozan said, when it's cold, it kills you with cold. When it's hot, it kills you with heat. So, very, very straightforward. Hakuin, a great Zen teacher in Japan, later on added a comment here that said, if you can see Tozan by means of this example, you may consider him foremost among the 5 houses and the 7 sects of Zen. Even Umon looks clumsy by comparison. I always often bring up koans from Umon, so this is like very, very high praise indeed, maybe a little tongue-in-cheek. But it's talking about this, when cold and heat come, how does one avoid them? So that's our natural reaction when difficulties come, perhaps, is to try to avoid them. I was thinking about this trip that I took right before, just a little before the trip. I had to fly to the East Coast. I hurt my back, and and then so I thought, it's okay. I've got a couple of days. I'm gonna go see my chiropractor, who I've known for many years. He's in Palm Desert a couple of days and Palm Springs a couple of days, and I've known this gentleman who's great for probably 15 years or something. And so I went to make an appointment, and he'd gone away on vacation. And it's like, oh no, because I've had negative experiences go into, and if you go to somebody who's like, particularly in the area of like healing modalities, I don't like going somewhere new. You don't know the person, you don't know, so I'm like, oh, I don't want to go anywhere. Oh, it's okay. I'll just kind of put up with it and hope it get, and do some things, take some ibuprofen. Then had to fly feeling that way. This is, if you don't want to listen to 10 minutes of me moaning about the trip I just took, then you can mute me. Right? But I'll try and keep it shorter than 10 minutes. Then fly out to the East Coast for this, putting together something for it was actually for Yusin's mother for a birthday. Quite a lot of organizing. And then my son Dylan was along for a ride. He gets sick. He must have picked up something on the plane. And then and it's kind of like a stomach flu. And then I get it, and then so everyone gets sick then, and then so the rest of the time is just that way. And I had this feeling, I just this realization that reality is just not conforming to my expectations. This is not what I planned, right? This is not going the way that I planned it. I've been saying for weeks, it's so hot, Yokoji. Oh, I can't wait to go to Maine. It's so beautiful. It's going to be amazing, right? Playing that game of sort of projecting, a little hopeful thing on the horizon, which can function as like a useful delusion, something to look forward to. It's probably not going to be like that, but it's like looking forward to Christmas. Then, just dealing, but for myself, just as I'd say pretty long-term practitioner at this point, just very instructive to have this, okay, feeling very unwell, being in an unfamiliar place, you don't have really what you need, and then realizing, oh wow, no, this is what it is. And now how do I approach this? How do I practice with this? And just fast forward to the kind of a long trip coming back, and then getting on the plane. I'll save you my long version. And so, when you kind of get towards the back of the plane, you're at the back of the plane, and then there's all kinds of delays with loading, and then there's people coming on, and they make an announcement that we're really going to make sure you've only got one carry-on and a personal item, And I could see somebody walking ahead, and if you don't, we're going to stop you and make you check it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fair enough, you know, and I'm abiding by the rules. We've got our carry-ons and everything. And then I see somebody go ahead and they've got a clearly way too big bag with an extra bag and something else too. And I'm like, they're going to let that person on. Don't let that person on. And in my mind, and then they let them on. Oh, of course they let them on. And I'm having this whole struggle. And then you kind of get on the plane and it starts building from there. And then for myself, I just found myself interestingly watching my descent into unnecessary suffering. I'm already not feeling well, but now it's his fault, it's their fault, it's the airline's fault, it's the world's fault, right? It all starts to appear. And then just watching how much I indulge that or not. Indulge that or not. I feel like if we're in a place of difficulties arising and there's no conscious choice available, then, well, that's just it. There's no conscious choice available. And, you know, perhaps I'm being unfair here, but it seems for many people that there's no conscious choice available. It's just a reactive response that just unfolds. I don't have that excuse because I'm a Dharma practitioner. And so there's enough space to witness a reaction, see the voice, hear the voice, and then whether to indulge and perpetuate it or not. And also how to what to transmit to, in this case, my family, other people around me. Do I want to be the person who, you know, shall I be the person who is just adding to the dukkha? Or is there a response there that can help to alleviate it? You know, so I found myself very much, and this koan came to mind when sitting, and you know, you get the kind of a cramped seat, and you're not feeling well, and you realize, okay, you've got 6 hours of this, okay, and you know, and then the screen thing's not working properly. It's okay. It just keeps piling on, and this is where this koan really comes to life for me, and the Zen way here. When cold and heat come, how does one avoid them? Tozan and his monks were not flying around on Delta Airlines. They were living in a temple in China, dealing, I would imagine, with a more minimal and simple existence in terms of everyday activity, but still the same capacity for dukkha, the same appearance of dukkha, and the same practice response available. Cold and heat comes. This was, I'm sure, was no spa in the mountains where they lived. In the winters would be cold, cold, cold. I was reading about Master Dogen's temple at Eiheiji, which is in the far snow country of Japan. They had a special ceremony where they celebrated the lighting of the furnace in October. So we had a day in October where they lit the fire. It probably got cold in the mountain country of Japan long before Furnace Day came along, but they had a limited amount of, you know, of resources, so they would have a celebration and a ceremony about the lighting of the furnace, dealing with heat, dealing with cold. This summer has been hot for very many of us, can be really uncomfortably so. When it arrives, when we're experiencing it, what can we do? What can we do? Now, certainly there is a lot to be done on a relative practical level. And those of you who can avail yourselves of air conditioning can just do that. Good to go. Right? Or if you're cold and we've got the resources to turn the heat up, okay, we could do that. But if cold and heat, you can switch those examples out and put something else in there. Something that we really can't do anything practical to alleviate. The monk asks, how do you avoid that? How do you avoid dukkha? How do you avoid suffering? I respect the monk's intention here. Nobody wants to suffer. There's a good friend of mine who's practiced at the Zen Center for many years who'll come and do retreats, and he likes to say, we're not here to suffer. We're not here to suffer, dude. He'd say, Ted, who comes from Zen Center, we're not here to suffer. He likes to remind people of that at the Zen Center, because that can sometimes get lost in the practice. It could be a nice reminder. But when heat and cold, how do we avoid them? How do we escape? And Tozan says, why not go to the place where there is no hot or cold? And if you're thinking, is that, it's not Hawaii, by the way. It's not somewhere in the Mediterranean, which is all not too hot and not too cold. So that's not the escape here. But why not go to the place where there is no... The monk asks, how is it where there is no hot and no cold? So he has no understanding or realization of what Tozan is talking about. The place of no hot, the place of no cold, the place of no dukkha. So he asks Tozan, well, you're clearly an enlightened teacher, so please, can you tell me what that's like? This comes up in Zen often, in teaching and the training, is as human beings in Dharma practice, or in any kind of practice, we often want to know what it's like to see if we want to do it or not. Or to see if it's going to be worth the effort or not. Because sitting long is tiring, doing retreats is tiring. So sometimes the questions that you get as a Dharma teacher is, what is it like when? Because somebody wants to know, is this worth my time and effort? And this is kind of like the monk is, how is it where there is no cold or no heat? And then Tozan says this answer, when it's cold, it kills you with cold. When it's hot, it kills you with heat. Now, he doesn't mean literally in one sense, but perhaps he does mean it literally in another sense. This doesn't mean when it's cold, go out there and lie it down in the snow and give up, and you'll be found in a week's time or something, right? He's not saying anything like that. When it's cold, let it kill you with cold. When it's hot, let it kills you with hot. But that's a question for each of us. How is it? It brings me back to that plane ride just yesterday, where to sit and resist, to have the appearance of dukkha, even in my small privileged way. Look at me suffering, flying from the East Coast. I mean, gosh, many people are struggling to eat in the world, so I'm aware of that, right? But we could be in this place, and then it's to sit there. Do I add to this? Do I build a story? Do I criticize others? Do I blame the world? Or can I unilaterally and completely surrender to things as they are? Can I allow the world, which is undoubtedly appearing as this now, to be this now? Can I allow and accept that this is not my my karma, right? It's not mine because I don't own it, but this is the appearance of the world's karma manifesting as my life now. And then to just sit on the plane, no problem. To feel unwell, no problem. Not I'm enjoying myself. No, but just it is just you really fully surrender to the fact of the matter, the way things are. That's the Zen way, or an aspect of the Zen way. Zen is often equated, popularly in the culture with just being chill all the time, right? Having that kind of equanimity, nothing phases, and that's become something of a mistaken stereotype. But like a lot of stereotypes, it has its roots in something real, right? Which is the equanimity to accept the world as it is. To be hot and just completely hot. To be cold and just cold. To feel sick and to be completely sick. To be in a difficult situation at work, to be in an argument with a relative or a partner. All of these different appearances of dukkha. There is that practice aspect that Buddhism is replete with teachings and approaches to minimize dukkha, to minimize suffering. Practice in wholesome and positive ways. And we should certainly explore and practice those ways. That's that practice component. But what Tozan is talking here again is this principle aspect. When we resist the way things are, we suffer. A lot of suffering can be relieved, and ultimately all suffering can be relieved with the radical acceptance and submission to the fullness of the way things are in all directions. But it requires an extra and particularly uncomfortable shift, which is when it's cold, it kills you with cold. When it's hot, it kills you with heat. It's for you, me, I that has to shift to really to see into this principle. The things are happening to me. That there's a world of conditions and things that are happening to me. That there's two things, me and the world isn't cooperating. How much dukkha, how much suffering comes from that tension? But dissolving or relinquishing of a letting go of the I, me, self allows things to be as they are without negative comment. It's just what it is. And intrinsically, fundamentally, there's no problem anywhere. But me, I, has always got a relationship to conditions. And conditions will always be impermanent and cause, well, we focus on difficulty and dukkha, but that can sometimes give Buddhism or Dharma practice a bad rap because we focus on the negatives, right? But it's a human life is not just the dukkha or the dissatisfaction, but the joy and the easy things. We don't really need to talk about that so much. That takes care of itself. That's really not a problem. But as human beings, we're all involved in this life of challenge and dissatisfaction that comes with the package. I like to talk on these two approaches. Practice, practice, practice. Method and precepts and approaches, and actually put it into practice. I met Tenshin Roshi. He shared recently a memory of being at Zen Center in Los Angeles years ago, and there was a Theravadan monk there who followed the precepts and excuse me, wouldn't eat after noon, and Intention felt like he was a little uptight, and he had all of these rules, and he felt bad for the guy, you know, being a freewheeling Zen student. And he said to him, "Why do you do all of these practices and follow all of these precepts?" And he said, the monk said, "Because it makes me happy." And that wasn't the answer he was expecting. He did it because it made him happy. It relieved him of suffering. Yeah, so there is that practice. Of course, there is that practice aspect. But the principle is, at the root of our experience is the possibility and the realization and the fullness of acceptance of the whole world as it is now, no problem. Pure awareness has no difficulty. Present awareness is unconditioned. You are that. That principle, that aspect, is what we uncover, bring into focus, and realize to greater depth in our practice of meditation, in the practice of still sitting, is to realize that. We have our human nature, but there is also this Buddha nature that we all are. And the Buddha, we could say, is somebody who lived a couple of thousand years ago, but the Buddha is hiding in plain sight right now, always. Thank you for letting me complain about my recent trip. I'd like to open it up for any comment, any questions, any difficult travel experiences. We have a little time. I'd love to hear from you. I'm running out of voice. I wanted to thank Doug again for kindly co-hosting, muscling through some audio issues and still throwing everything in the chat for us so that we can be reminded of what's upcoming, and also, of course, the request always for our collective support of the organization to keep it going. Yeah, great comment in the chat. Fly first class next time. That's, you know, that's you, right? On a relative level, if you've got the dosh and you want to throw it down for a ticket in first class. But I heard a stand-up comic, and he was talking about flying to New Zealand, and he said he was quite wealthy, and it was such a long-haul flight that he threw the money down to go first class because he just couldn't face going on that flight another way. And he said it cost how many different, you know, it's like enormous amount of money. And he said, you know what it was like the whole trip? It was like sitting in your favorite recliner at home while somebody squeezed your head the whole time. Right, so even in first class, says Dukkha. In fact, the way that we are as human beings, I think there's a bit more up in first sometimes too, right? And no matter how we try and like control relative conditions, you can't escape it. Okay, my friends. Well, I appreciate you, again, sitting with you, and you indulging me with my my talk today, and I hope it was useful to look at it from these different angles. Again, I really appreciate you and the opportunity to sit and practice. Let's keep going together, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.